Hello, good morning, Mariam.
Morning, Lynette. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Let's just wait for the others to join.
Okay, okay.
Hello, good morning.
Good
How is
morning.
everyone doing?
Good morning.
Morning, how are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, how has our week been? Mine was absolutely amazing. Let us know how your week has been on the chat box, and we shall pick up from there as we wait for the rest to join. So today's topic is careers around mental health. And for us, if as mental health advocates, if we hear about mental health or or counseling, we think that the careers that are associated with it is only counseling, psychologist, yeah? While in this field, we have so many careers that we can explore on, and today's guest is going to share more light on that. We have an amazing, amazing lady in the house today. I will call her to introduce herself, and then we can pick it up from there. So, karibu sana, Joyce.
Thank you, Mariam. My name is Dr. Joyce Wangari Ngugi. I go by Dr. Wangari. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. You wanted just an introduction? Sorry, you're muted.
I'll say, let me just switch on my video so you're able to see me at least. And if I can request even the fellows to do that. Yeah. So Wangare, we have about 50 fellows that we are working. We are doing this fellowship with them for 12 weeks. So we have a few weeks remaining. And today's topic, we just wanted to share more light on them in terms of the careers that are around mental health. So guys, how are we? I can't see any chats. How has our week been?
Hello, morning. Our week has been awesome, and we are excited to learn today.
Thank you so much, Wilma. So guys, feel very free to ask Dr. Wangari any questions. We had shared our learning expectations yesterday, which she has. So we can look into that, but feel free to ask questions, feel free to comment, feel free to give feedback and all that. So with that being said, Dr. Wangari, I will leave the floor for you. So you can take us through careers that are associated with mental health. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Mariam. And thank you for that wonderful intro. I appreciate it. So my name is Dr. Wangari, as I said earlier, and I'm so honored to be here. I'm glad to know you are actually mental health champions. So in case you have any extra expectations that you still thought about after you compiled a few yesterday, let me know. So I just want to know also in the chat, I'm seeing lots of people introducing themselves, but I'd like to know, what would you like to know about this topic on careers around mental health? So I still would like to take a few more shares just to know. I'm seeing many people still doing the greetings and how they're doing. Amazing, wonderful. I'm seeing the greetings and all that. So would anybody also proceed to share what they would like to know for today? Just type in the chat in case you thought up anything else that you think would be valuable to learn today. We are in the new learning expectations are very important. We start from the end backwards. Maybe there's some things I wanted to tell you that you already know about. Okay, I think we are still thinking about it. There's still a lot more people still doing the greetings. So I guess we will create this as we go along, no problem. So I'll start by sharing my screen, and I'll have a really brief but highly interactive sharing about this. And then I will invite us for more discussions. But even before I do that, I just wanted to say I have been in the field for 17 years now, since 2006. I have always worked as I studied, and I just completed my doctorate last year. So in 2006, I did my certificate and I was qualified to actually start work I worked in agencies. I also founded a few agencies doing this work, mostly around Nairobi, but also deployed across the world. Then at the same time, when I did my certificate, I also enrolled for my bachelor's, which I graduated in 2009. And soon after, immediately, I started my master's. Thank you so much for the expectations. Keep them coming. So I've just asked for those who come in, what would you like to know about mental health careers? I'm really curious to know what you already know and what is missing, or what you would say are the gaps in your understanding, so that today will be quite comprehensive. So as I was saying, I completed my bachelor's in 2009, and I soon after completed my master's in 2011. My doctorate took 10 years for the graduation, so I just completed it in 2021, and I graduated last year, 2022. And all this time, I have always done part-time schooling and part-time working, and at least with evening classes, especially for the graduate level, I was able to even work full-time sometimes. And so such is the typical career path for most of us who want to enter formal training, is that you go and get qualifications, and we'll be talking more about all these things. So I have actually created another, I have created a number of platforms. One of them is very interesting. It's called MHPSS Opportunities. And after this, if you want to join it, you're very welcome, where I post opportunities for mental health careers daily. So that is a really wonderful platform, where probably where I think Mariam could have found me, because I'm actively doing the work of helping people either grow or launch their mental health careers. So that's what I am up to and about. And in that mentorship, I have found a lot of us who are interested in mental health space, actually coming out of different careers, different sectors, and wanting to give back. There's a huge philanthropy arm in the space of mental health careers. And that's very important because of the issues of access and affordability and things like that. And so aside from that, there are people who are there and they get jobs. It is, I would say, arguably the biggest mental health jobs platform. So that's also important. I wanted to mention that I do run a mentorship program with 20,000 plus people interested in joining or transitioning inside the space of mental health. So I see a lot of people giving their expectations, keep them coming. So I'm seeing someone saying they would like to know, how do we grow mental health linkages across Africa? Because the different African countries are at different levels of understanding mental health and dealing with it. That's a really wonderful question. Thank you, Raza Ahmed. I will be addressing it as I weave it into my presentation, but just to quickly say, I am also the founder of Forum of African Psychology, Kenya branch. And in that forum, we are now looking at Pan-Africanism as a new wave of centering and highlighting indigenous African approaches to mental health work. It is true, I've worked in quite a number of African countries where there's hardly any legislation. Most recently, I've been in Somalia and also in DRC, where there's hardly any policy on anything mental health, which means that professionalization of the field of mental health will take a while in some countries. And so at those different levels, we talk about different partnerships as well as levels of involvement. So you want to know, so it doesn't mean that the needs are not there just because, you know, people are at different levels of understanding. As a matter of fact, in our traditional African societies, we had a lot of input in mental health through formal community structures. Each one of us knows that in the African setup, for example, the aunties are very important because they mediated a lot of conversations between children and their parents. And we also had elders in every community. So the truth is there is a varied understanding of causes and attributions of mental health suffering or conditions. And that does not make them right or wrong. it just makes them different. And so the idea is to partner with all kinds of people doing the work. We do have traditional healers, we do have clergy, we do have teachers, we do have first aiders. And so that's a really, thank you, that's a really good question. Helena Mapenai says, understanding the impact of mental health on career success. Yes, I will actually tackle that. And it is actually a very important field. And obviously we know that mental health does have an impact on career trajectory, career success, and performance and things like that. And then somebody else, Busolo, said, I'm expecting to hear more on career opportunities with regards to the children area. Okay, that's nice to know that you're interested in working with children, and I believe you'll be able to get that today. Please bring your expectations, keep them coming. I'd like to know what you would like to learn. So I will just run through the slides because it's a good visual aid to help us all follow some structure. Okay, so my website is wangari.africa, and I'm really happy to make this highly interactive and so that we can all learn together. So some learning outcomes or expectations is that, one, you'll be able to grasp a comprehensive overview, hopefully, of the state of mental health career landscape and the options that are in Kenya, okay? Then you'll be able to understand why careers around mental health are important, the prospects and profitability for those of you who are thinking of it as a profession. And we also say that there are prospects even in philanthropy, big prospects there as well. And then obviously qualifications. How do you actually start the career? And we talk about formal and informal. And there are now quite a number of scholarships. I think COVID gave us this kind of a blessing that we all got online, especially during lockdown. And suddenly there was all these massive, massive opportunities for scholarships, a lot of universities, a lot of training centers moving online, making it more global. And that is a question somebody had asked about, how do we even move across our geographical boundaries, like, for example, in Africa? And then registration and licensing, which is now more formal. There is a new board. It was promulgated by the former cabinet secretary or minister of health, Mutahi Kagwe. He actually did that in August. And we've had now the requirements of formal mental health practitioners having to be registered, you know, like the way you have police officers with a badge and there's a number, so that you don't even have to ask the police officer their name. You can actually get, that's the registration number. And so we are going to be serialized, or we are going to be given registration based on minimum qualifications that are required in the field. And then soon after someone is registered, they can also apply for licensing, which means that they have fulfilled some criteria of ongoing training, just like doctors, lawyers, engineers have ongoing training. In mental health, we also have ongoing training. We call them continuous professional development. For you to get a license, you have to show you've completed a certain number of hours every year. And then the other one that's a requirement now under the board, the new board of counselors and psychologists, is called, you know, you'll also be given, aside from training, you'll also be given an opportunity to prove that you have gone for clinical supervision. So that, in other words, there's a mentor, there's a supervisor who's checking your work. So now we do have formal, very formal standards for regulating all these things. Registration and licensing is about regulation by the government to check for who is operating legally. And this helps to weed out quacks or people who would be claiming to do more than what they are competent in doing. So that's very important. And so I'll end my presentation and I'll invite questions and answers. But feel free at any time, if you want to ask, just raise your virtual hand or type in the chat. So why are mental health careers important? So these careers are a critical social service. So we're in the field of social services. A lot of us consider ourselves social scientists because, for instance, I am a psychologist. A psychologist studies the human brain and behavior. And the goals of psychology are to describe, explain, predict and control meaning influence behavior. So many people embark on mental health careers because it has very many different benefits and it's significant. So, but the top 4 benefits or the importance is 1, the personal satisfaction or fulfillment. It is the most widely cited reason because most people also entering the field have seen their own brokenness or the brokenness of their families. So we are what we call wounded healers. So in a sense, also attempting to deepen self-awareness and healing in our own lives. And this is one career that gives you a gift. You cannot do this work unless you work on yourself first. So for instance, throughout school, we were required ourselves to go for our own personal therapy. And so this is a requirement. You have to clock a certain number of hours getting listened to and getting healing so that now you are also a vessel who's able to actually listen to others. But the mental health career is all about helping and compassion and making a difference. So that's the second significance. Most people will say, it's about personal satisfaction or fulfillment. Number 2, they'll say it's because it makes a difference in lives of other people. So we basically diminish death and increase the quality of life. So when we talk about quality of life, we are talking about thriving and flourishing. For instance, in the field of positive psychology, we are highlighting people's strengths and we want people's well-being to shoot up. We want people to even be happier than they currently are, for example. So it doesn't mean it's only for those people with conditions or who are broken. You can move from good to better to best. Then number 3, it gives flexibility. And now a lot of us are what we call digital nomads. For instance, here on this call, we are all here because of online platforms. So in other words, you can live and work from any location. I think technology has given us that gift. Here I am speaking with a group of you. If you are in a place seated, that would be a big room, But this enables us to really get global reach. I am a global consultant on mental health matters because of telehealth solutions. I can also put up my books on Amazon now. From any location, I can be working and making a difference and preventing suicides and things like that. Then obviously, this career is one of those that has very many transdisciplinary benefits. Transdisciplinary means that wherever there are people, there is mental health. So we work across different sectors in the economy. And so we are relevant for every single SDG. So if you can remember all the different sustainable development goals, mental health falls under all of them. So it gives you multiple benefits. You can always add skills and knowledge. There are a host of different pathways, careers you can develop and advance, not just in counseling, which is the mainstay of mental health, but also, psychology, assessment, training, research, advocacy, and all these things are very necessary for human development. So those are some of the reasons why, mental health careers are important. Can you think of any other? So I'd like to know, why else do you think mental health careers are necessary? Let's see if you are listening or you've left me in the Zoom room alone. Why else do you think? You can just type in the chat, no problem. I say this will be highly interactive, so I believe you're just thinking about the question. Why do you think mental health careers are necessary or important? Yes, thank you so much for your responses. Keep them coming. So I see Brian Kipkoech saying they are in line with the global goals, including millennial goals like the SDGs. Yes, well said. Okay. Anyone else? All right, I'll just assume that we are all proceeding together. Thank you. Catherine Kakeja says, I believe the impact you can have on others is a big factor. Yes, that is very, very true. It's all about people. You're very right. Thank you. All right. So when we talk about mental health careers, we can classify them variously. Formal to informal, think of a spectrum or a continuum. Broad areas to highly specialized areas. Then we can also talk about populations or settings. Okay, so those are the different ways we can talk about mental health careers or careers around mental health. So from the formal to informality spectrum, we say that obviously for formal careers, you will have standards. For instance, for you to call yourself a psychologist or a counselor in Kenya, you must have qualified with either a diploma or a degree. So if you have less than that, you cannot be called a psychologist or a counselor in Kenya. Psychiatrists also, those are medical doctors who study the brain and they can prescribe medication. Someone asked whether the future of psychology and counseling will be such that they will be treated like doctors and be able to prescribe medication. Well, I hope that's the case, because in about 2 different states in the US now, we have some psychologists who can prescribe. But in Kenya, psychologists are not allowed to prescribe. They study a lot about the brain and the chemicals and things like that, but then they're still not allowed to do that. So that's just important to know the difference between psychiatry and psychology. It's a very common question. Then obviously we have other formal careers: mental health research, nursing, clinical officer, social worker, first aider, and all these are in the space of mental health, but you have to have a certification or a license, so that's when we talk about formal. Informal, I was made to understand that all of you here are champions of mental health. So if you haven't taken formal training, then you would call yourself an informal mental health worker. You're still very important, Okay, I see more answers on why you think mental health careers are important. Raza Ahmed, because everyone is unique cognitively and in behavior. Yes, it's really important, because actually, for instance, in the field of psychology, we are actually interested in individual differences, the uniqueness of every person. So thank you for that contribution. Kilena Mapenai says, mental health issues are prevalent worldwide and the demand for mental health services continues to rise. Yes. Mental health careers such as psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, counselors, social workers are essential in providing the necessary support and treatment to individuals experiencing mental health challenges. You have said it better, actually, than what I explained. So very well said. The idea of providing people with prevention and also interventions, for mental health challenges. And somebody else, Aisha Sabit, says, because the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. It's not how much you do, but how much you love, you put into the doing that matters. Yes, it's one of those passion careers. So informal mental health careers, so you don't have to necessarily have a graduate or doctoral level. This is important to say, because like in the global north, for you to be a formal mental health worker, you have to have either a master's or a doctorate. But now when we talk about informal mental health, these are people who've taken maybe a short course, maybe you took the WHO Quality Rights Initiative course, or you've been trained by Red Cross to do mental health first aid. And so we talk about your role in just helping individuals cope. We have champions, mental health first aiders, people with lived experiences, or PWLE, of mental health or bipolar or any of the mental health conditions or substance use disorders. Then we talk about independent mental health advocates, which I think most of you are the champions doing this work. So those are informal mental health careers, just some examples, not all of them. So now let's talk about the areas. So this is really interesting. Somebody is asking, Daki Duba is asking, in Kenya, there are some platforms that gives 4 weeks training and learners left to practice. I believe it's unethical. Is that informal? Okay, that's a really good question. So we've got to look at that a bit later when I'll be talking about registration and licensing. For instance, now, what are the prerequisites to enter the training? Okay, so after 4 weeks, what are the competency benchmarks? So we say you can get training on anything. In fact, online, you can get even shorter than 4 weeks. About being ethical or unethical depends on whether you practice in your scope of competence. That's the most important thing to emphasize. So while professional development courses are always available and they are free, you can go to any platform, even online. You can go to Allison, FutureLearn, Coursera, etc. what you have to do is declare at every time whether you are competent or not. And that's why referral networks are very, very major in our space, because we are highly specialized and not everybody can do everything. And also we have different levels of competence. So that might be considered formal if the 4 weeks training is part of maybe, for instance, continuous professional development for those who need to continue the work. Remember, we call ourselves practitioners, meaning we are always practicing. We are never perfect. And our field has a lot of growth over the years. So therefore, we have to prove we are taking trainings all the time, okay? So those are what I called CPDs earlier. However, if it is not part of that, then we can also consider that informal. So remember, it all depends on the context, and I hope I've answered that question. I hope you are well answered. All right. So areas of specialization, I'll just be biased to psychology here, although mental health is not all about psychology only. But, you know, we can talk about careers in specific fields. Somebody had asked, I think it was Busolo, he wants to know about working with children. So that's actually a very major specialization in the field. And we call that, you know, the developmental approach. So the lifespan approach, okay? So we want to know how do people progress across the ages? And so that's part of developmental. Learning is different at different ages. We are all not born speaking. We all learned how to speak, for example. Okay, so we talk about lifespan development. You can see that in the middle pillar there, but you can also see there are other areas like the psychology, neuroscience. Those are one of the newest areas. And I think Aga Khan University is doing a wonderful job spearheading this area of brain and mind, you know, development through neuroscience, studying the nerves and how the brain works. Very biological. We can talk about cognitive thinking processes. Somebody had even mentioned cognitive earlier in the chat. And we can even pick a specific aspect of cognitive. For example, memory. How does memory get affected, for example, after a road accident? If you get hit on the head and get traumatic brain injury, for example. Then we have social and personality. Those are just examples of different things. How do we motivate ourselves when we don't feel like doing something? And then mental and physical health. Now that's quite broad. We can talk about lifestyle, therapies, you know, and we always talk about the nature and the nurture. So if you think of a rectangle, nature is your genetic endowment and all these things you get naturally. And then nurture is your family legacy of socialization and environment and all these other influences. And so overall, how do those actually impact someone? And those are areas of specialization in themselves, just looking at different areas. And so you'll find, including somebody else had asked about career success. So that is an aspect of lifestyle to do with work. So we can also be, we can also understand the impact of mental health on career success. You know, a lot of people with serious mental health conditions will struggle throughout their lifestyles because, especially because of stigma, you know. And then if you're going through a mental health space and maybe your employer is not very kind or understanding, you might have some trouble. But otherwise, to understand that and to create advocacy for yourself throughout your career is very important. So thank you for that question on careers. So again, this is a very popular triangle that a lot of us who are in the field, we know about. We can talk about how broad or narrow is your focus. So for example, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm really at the top there of the triangle, but I also do all the work down to the bottom. So starting from the bottom, we are advocates, all of us in this platform. And here we want to advocate for human rights, humanitarian practices, things that protect the dignity of people. We want to advocate for clean water, safe shelters. Those are things that promote mental health. And then from there, from the general population, we can pick some people who need some strengthening. For example, at community level, at family level. And now we are going narrower, see, from the general population to community and family, and thinking about, for instance, if you are a family counselor, you'd be thinking about how to support child-friendly spaces. So we don't say, oh, you need to maybe child-proof your house. We've stopped saying that in the field now. We say we need a child-friendly house. So instead of saying, oh, tunataka tuondoe TV, mtoto asiangushe, we don't want the child to break the TV. We are not child-proofing the house. We are making the place child-friendly. You can put the TV on the wall and create a play area for the child. So those are some ways to support families and communities. And then now we move to very focused psychosocial support. And this may be selecting people who have now identified needs and putting them in little groups, for example, families, individuals, and giving them some basic emotional and practical support, really focused on different themes. For example, trauma. People have just gone through trauma. Then at the top of the tip of that triangle, you can see is highly individualized clinical mental health care. So now you can take somebody for one-on-one therapy and really do a deep diagnosis as to all what's going on. And this is the way we think about how broad or how narrow each of these, interventions are for mental health and psychosocial support. Again, we talked about sectors and settings, and just in a nutshell, it's good to know there will always be need for mental health wherever there are people. So we work in clinical settings, that's like hospitals, community settings, like youth centers, organizational settings like banks, family settings. The family is the basic unit of society and it's very important. And then so employment can be, in agencies. Some people are self-employed, they're in their private practice. You can also be an entrepreneur creating spaces for practitioners and work. Or you can be in philanthropy. There's a lot of foundations doing mental health work. So we have populations as well. We talk about this same as settings as populations. So forensic setting, for example, is like prisons or probation officers. A lot of them have to be qualified in mental health for you to actually influence someone to change their behavior. Maybe they were convicted with something and they have to prove that their behavior has now changed. And that's really, really important. Sylvia, please mute your microphone. Thank you. And then I work a lot in disability sector. I work with people who are deaf and hard of hearing. So you'll find that that is a population of interest. And in that population, we use a lot of social justice approaches. So again, we'll see practitioners working alone or in group practice with other partners in partnerships. And they can either do physical sessions in the office or online, or sometimes hybrid. You might find like today in this session, if some of you are in a hall and you're physically present there and others are online, we can do, something like that, yeah. So somebody replied to Daki, Michelle Karaoke says, I agree with you, this 4-week training, and someone is already left to start counseling, like a professional doesn't also stand well with me. I can't comprehend. That's a good point. Yes, we do have minimum standards for lengths of proficiency, what we call proficiency. For example, a certificate, a diploma, a degree, they're all actually listed under the various bodies that regulate. And I'll talk about that shortly. Thank you. So some typical job titles. I think it's good to know that mental health spaces have so many. These are just some of them. Psychiatrist is one, clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist. I am both a clinical psychologist and a counseling psychologist. I'm also a researcher. Then counselor, psychiatric nurse. We also say mental health nurse, psychiatric social workers, psychiatric clinical officer, psychiatric pharmacist, psychiatric researcher or mental health researcher, addiction counselor, MFT, marriage family therapist, HTC, that is HIV testing and counseling. Then providers like those, occupational therapists, a lot of them now have had extra training in mental health. Speech therapists have also been trained, especially in some countries, they have to have some sort of mental health training. Remember, in some jurisdictions, these are considered inside mental health. In some, they are not. It depends on how the course is built up. Creative art therapists, a lot of us now using music, drama, dance, art, yoga, sport. I use a lot of creative art therapies in my work myself. I'm also certified in the same. We have religious counselors. psychological first aiders, independent mental health ambassadors or IMHAs or champions. Those are just some, and there are so many more. So how do you determine the best mental health career for yourself? There's a very interesting quiz. That's just a fun quiz. It's not normed or standardized or anything, but it's a great place to start because you might need career guidance at every stage. If you are entering the field, you're just launching, or if you want to grow and transition into even greater heights or leaving the field, retirement. A lot of people enter mental health field when they retire from active duty, from other careers. That's really interesting to know. So what's a typical day like in the field of mental health? So it obviously will vary per specialization or population. So you have the primary duty on focusing on the needs of, we call them patients or clients, and providing precise help. So the idea there of help is diagnosis, treatment, prevention, promotion of mental health. So we observe, we are actually trained behavioral observationists. We do very, very deep listening, and we appropriately respond to any kind of stress or abnormal behavior, feelings, thoughts, or social conditions. And we use a holistic approach. It's called biopsychosocial spiritual approach. So the biological, the psychological, the sociological, the spiritual. And now the steps, most of them are typically like, first you explore the issues, then you understand the issue, then you take action. So there'll be a host of assessments throughout, some counseling, some follow-up, typically maybe after 3 months and 6 months, and then documentation. Keeping records is very, very central in our field because we've got to do treatment plans and keep changing the strategies and interventions to best meet the stated needs or articulated needs or identified needs from the client or client. And those in private practice additionally have to set time for business generation and starting up the company or, creating more business. So those are some things that happen on a typical day of a mental health career person. And what are the prospects? So if you've ever heard of the story of the glass being half empty or half full, we have people we call optimists, we have realists, and we have pessimists. Now, I consider myself an optimist, and I'm also an Afrofuturist. So being optimistic, I say there are still not enough well-remunerated jobs for employment in mental health careers, but there's a big space for entrepreneurship. So I'm very, very optimistic that for you who is here, who can take on some entrepreneurship. Okay, so there's a question from Brian Kipruto. Is the model different from the biopsychosocial model? Yes, slightly, because I added spiritual, but we are talking about the same thing. The idea of holistically looking at this individual from all these aspects. What's happening in the body, what's happening in the mind, that's biopsycho, and then social, what's happening in the social networks, and what's happening in the spiritual space as well. So Brian, that's a good question. Yeah, we're talking about the same thing. So we do have, profitability and prospects if you take it up as a career, because if you are adept at being dynamic, being flexible, being versatile, then you will not get stuck with, maybe underemployment. You can create income through, especially now with technology, through just online work. Today, we are all here because of technology, and it doesn't matter which corner of the world you're joining us from, right? So you'll find that now most mental health workers are in the private sector. Recently, the government has done a great job. They've been absorbing a lot of mental health workers into the public service. So if you visit the public service office or go to their website, you'll see that now they do have job groups and, remuneration. However, one of the disadvantages of government is they will only take you at entry level. So you then have to slowly go up the job groups. However, in the private sector, it's anything you want to create, especially with online platforms, that really gives you a bigger space that's more international. And then the idea of how broad or specialized, remember we were talking about that earlier? So that's what we call niching. When you create a niche or a specialized area, then you become known for something. I've become known for helping people in their mental health careers. So I'm called to a lot of functions like this. And so if you train and become competent in what you're doing, and how do we achieve continuous competence? We go for further training. We have continuous education. We call that continuous professional development, or CPD, or continuous medical education, CME. We have different various names, but the idea of in-house training in our work is always there. Then we have to go for clinical supervision to check how well our interventions are. And then formal training increases the chances of higher income. So those are just some ideas on, whether you think these prospects are profitable. I get asked that a lot. So of course, you can always check out salary scales in the public service, as I said earlier. But most importantly, what makes it really a good prospect is the passion. And I think somebody had alluded to that in the chat. You really have to have a calling, because it's also quite draining to listen to people's problems over and over again, and also having to keep up with that by going for your own supervision so that you're listened to. But if this passion starts, then the perseverance will follow in order for you to actually create a thriving and growing career. So I had just put this up here because a lot of people ask, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist? And so I just put them, I know the writing is small, but I just put up some few, mental health jobs. And from most websites, they say the highest paying one is like psychiatrist, and then psychologist, and then we have others, social worker, MFT, school counselor, substance use or addiction counselor, career counselors. These people help. Somebody had asked about career. They help you to match your interest and ability to the best careers, Then we have social worker, rehab counselor, which is about, behavioral rehabilitation, So we have different salary scales. There's not a website I've seen comparing the different cadres in Kenya, but this one is mostly global. It's more universal. So somebody says sunset and sunrise determinism as well. Okay, so please explain that. I'm not sure what that is about. So as I said earlier, I do run a platform since October 2020. It's been about 3 years now. And we are assisting people with a one-stop shop for mental health job vacancies, internships, scholarships, fellowships, and all kinds of other opportunities, including now participants requested for sessions like this in order for them to have strategy calls on how to grow in their careers. So I do provide free 15 minutes consultation, and you can take my contacts and we'll be able to be in touch. So we are now operating across the globe because of the gift of being online. And somebody who asked about how do we create linkages across Africa, you have technology right at your so you have the world at your oyster because of technology. So everything is right there. And of course, we know there are still many people who are still unreached, even through technology. There are still a lot of people who cannot access mental health services. So there's still more opportunities to open up spaces. We have community Wi-Fi, so partnering with people who can provide access like that and things like that. I see a question. Counseling psychologist payment is private or public sector? Sincerely, we've raised the bar a bit high for individuals to afford, especially private clinics. That's a really good point. So actually, it's both. We do have counseling psychologists in the public sector. As I said earlier, just check out the public service website or visit their office. They'll give you the schemes of service. And we have a lot of them also in the private sector. Obviously, there are more in the private sector because it's just recently that the government absorbed them. And remember, health functions in this country are devolved. So in every county, if you go to any government office, you will get very subsidized. So about cost and affordability in government facilities, any level 4 or level 5, what we call sub-county, county and national level, hospitals should be able to provide you a mental health, trained mental health provider. So whether they are a clinical officer, a nurse, but they have mental health training. And so those people have been very valuable, especially in stemming the spate of suicide recently and things like that. So yeah, so you can go to any government facility at county or national level, and even sub-county, you'll find, by default, they just have someone there who you just ask, you just need to ask. And yes, I agree, the cost is still high. If you want to book a session with me, you pay, and it is not affordable for most people to attend private clinics. So what there is a gap in access, and there still is a gap in getting what is quality service. Unfortunately, quality is also considered expensive, which is very unfortunate. And so that's still a gap, and we need to think about funding models, yeah, for the work of mental health, especially the specialist mental health work in this country. So as I was saying, I will be talking about qualifications, and short courses are very available. I was even mentioning some sites, Allison's, FutureLearn, Coursera, can always get those for free. Now, the only important thing that I wanted to emphasize, and I'll emphasize again, is competence. So you can't take a course, a short course, and then say you're competent in doing everything. So we know that if we have more scholarships in future, that will significantly cut down issues like affordability, lack of access, to mental health care. So it's advisable to focus on your competence and area of training. Okay, that is why for more formal practitioners, that is why we are required to go for training. Okay, and this training is rigorous. We also have to count the number of hours. The number of hours in the field is considered as a part of a way of showing level of experience. Okay, so we log hours and we record how many hours we have done the work actually. And people are doing hundreds of thousands of hours, and they're being supervised. Okay, so beginning from the lowest level, certificate, diploma, undergraduate, or even higher diploma than undergraduate, master's, doctorate, you can get professional training. And remember that if you're from a different country, you can always go to the Kenya National Qualifications Authority and check out the Kenya National Qualifications Framework in order to know how to map your qualifications into this current job market in Kenya if you're not from Kenya. So that is what they call the equivalency. So if you're moving from jurisdiction to jurisdiction or country to country, you just need to know, okay, so what is considered here? Is it the same in that other country, so that you're working professionally? So for that person who had asked about working across Africa. So the KNQA website will assist you to know, at what level are you employable? So for example, in Kenya, I just said a counselor or a psychologist must have a diploma or a degree, okay? And then we talk about number of hours to enable us to demonstrate experience. And then we have to be registered. After showing that you've gone through some minimum training and you have some number of hours, you get a registration number. After that, you get a license. However, the board was just created, and all these things are yet to be regulated. And that's a problem, because then currently we are having a lot of, questions about who is duly recognized by the law to do, ethical and professional work, and then who can work under, a qualified and a certified person in order to evidence that they have, some sort of like approval to do their work from the government. So we're still in that teething stages with some teething problems. So that's it. And those are my contacts. I'll be happy now to take your questions, your comments, and anything else that you think I left out on the topic. Thank you so much. So I hope you have my contacts. I'll also share them if you need in the chat. Good, I have some hands. So we start with, yeah, it's very good now. I want to hear your voices. So stop typing in the chat now. I want to hear from you. Oginga Emma, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so
morning.
much, Dr. Wangari, for that insightful session. So I have several questions that I would like to seek clarity on. The first one being, what are the dynamics around the formation of CBOs, NGOs, and any other organization centered on mental health and what are the perks that comes with that? And my second question is, do mental health practitioners have associations or organizations that actually advocate for their rights in case of anything? Are there such organizations that one can join once you are a mental health practitioner? Thirdly, personally, I am a lawyer. I'm not yet an advocate, but I am currently doing my postgraduate diploma so that I can be an advocate. So I was looking at areas that I can venture into if I am not fully practicing as a mental health practitioner. And you mentioned research as one of them, but I was thinking of maybe policy making, because I am good in research and I think I can contribute in the area of policy developments around mental health. So being that you've been in the field for quite a good number of years, maybe you can enlighten me or advise me on how to go about that, if there are organizations that are accepting policy developers and such. Yeah, those are my questions.
Amazing questions. So let me take one by one. I really like your elaboration on the questions and I got them. Thank you. So the first one is, what are the dynamics of the different entities that would be considered as appropriate or viable to do mental health work, CBOs, NGOs, and any other? So that's a really good question. And it's almost also a legal question. I'm glad you're in the law. So my legal advice on the best entity would be, it depends. So I teach that actually. So I run a fellowship program also on mental health careers. And recently my participants said, tell us the difference between starting a CBO, an NGO, a foundation. Now there's an in-thing in Kenya called, you start a company limited by guarantee. So it's sort of a company which has an social enterprise approach. And so you can drop the word limited at the end of your company and have it as reading as foundation, although it's actually the entity is a company. So in other words, as a social enterprise, that's another one. As a social enterprise, you can do both for profit, and you can also undertake philanthropy or foundation work. So obviously we know that it depends on what your initiative would like to achieve. So CBOs are the easiest to start. They can be taking care of people's welfare and they might be interested in a suitable business model. The president just launched the latest Hustler group loans, and people are rushing to get registered and unregistered entities in order to form groups and get money from the Hustler Group fund that has just been launched on past day before yesterday. So, of course, with a CBO, it is more unstructured. You need about, a couple of people, maybe officials, at least 10 people usually, and then you need an official like a chair, secretary, a treasurer. And then the idea is that it runs from the community. So that's the idea of a CBO. So the advantage is that it is very connected to what's going on the ground. When we say things per ground in Kenya, we understand what we mean by that. And that's actually the advantage of a CBO. It's easy to start and you just need like 10 people and you can easily incorporate a lot of community impact actually inside of that work. And then let's now talk about the other entities. So you had mentioned the difference between CBO, NGO. So there are different forms of registration. A non-governmental organization or also an international non-governmental NGO. You can either have an NGO or an INGO or an INGO. So that one we know, again, it is also a private voluntary grouping. It is not for profit. So now that's the difference. It's not for commercial purposes. It is just for the benefit of the public at large. If you have any assets in an NGO, you cannot claim them to be yours. You give your computer or your table and it remains there for posterity, even after you are gone. It's the idea of social welfare, maybe development, charity, or research, So basically, the advantages of an NGO is there are no restrictions to the ownership and constitution. So your constitution can even include training, research. You can have foreign and local members, participating in the leadership. And then some NGOs are exempted from tax obligations, maybe because of their nature. You've seen that a lot, like in the UK, a lot of them being registered as charitable organizations, therefore they don't pay tax. So then you can, with an NGO, you do have a lot of power to acquire assets and property in the name of the NGO. So those are some advantages of registering. So the disadvantages, it may be prohibited from undertaking commercial purposes, So like now you have an NGO, you can't start investing in shares or stocks or commercial stuff, But then another disadvantage is you have to be vetted. When I started an NGO, the NIS was vetting us, and it took about a year to set up at the time, because you also have to have like a very extensive background check, because there are lots of NGOs doing illegal things. And we had to also include a payment. They do have a payment, process at the NGO coordination board. And then the other thing, a disadvantage is the activities of an NGO are susceptible to interference by the government. So that's another disadvantage. You saw recently the Supreme Court upholding that LGBTQ communities have the right to congregate anywhere. But if they go ahead and start NGOs, sometimes they are told, okay, there are some laws here in this country, so they are sometimes in trouble, some NGOs, okay. So obviously, you just have to do a name search for all these entities. You do a name search, then you make a substantive application. The last time I checked, I think it was about 18,000. I don't know if it has gone up. You have to have a constitution and office bearers, officials and stuff. Then we have what you call a society. Okay, so that's the second question you asked. Associations, societies, that is very important in the field of mental health, because they help us in nurturing and punishing members according to ethics. Okay, so it's just a society is like a club. It's any club, company, or partnership. So societies or associations are established maybe to advance a specific field of specialization in mental health. We have over 40 in the field of counseling and psychology. The most common or popular or the biggest are like KCPA and KPA. And so we have all these things that are also able to do trade unionization work. So they are able to advocate for maybe things like pay for people of a certain cadre or a certain profession like ours, Again, they can do profit. An association, unlike an NGO, an association can do business for profit. And then obviously they have to have, sort of a registration process. So they have a wide variety of activities according to their constitution. So the advantage is, again, there is no restriction on foreign members. That's important to say, because in this country, we know because of the job situation, we have to have very strict, like NGOs have to be very strict on who's the foreigner and who's the local, so that we keep a lot of the jobs for our citizens. So, but again, for society, for an NGO, you can have both foreign and local members. That's an advantage because it increases the Pan-African or global interactions. And then it may be actually easy to set up a society because there's common interest, so things like that. Obviously, disadvantages are liability. Liability is members are held personally liable for acts or omissions. So people are actually sometimes delisted from societies. For example, the Law Society of Kenya, if you act contrary to what an advocate should be doing in practice, you will be removed. You'll be struck off the list of the LSK registration. So again, we also pay the government in a different office, not the one for NGOs, for society. Then we have a trust or a foundation. This one is usually for, holding and managing assets. And, you'll find most trusts are started after somebody has died, and you'll see somebody saying, oh, want to continue their mental health work, for example. And so the obligations there are mandatory, that they have to invest in a particular, maybe there are lots of foundations and trusts now giving scholarships, for example, in the field of mental health. Again, the disadvantage is they lack legal personality. They can't hold property you'll be sued again. There's always a risk in the trust, you know, if you try to do any business in your own name. So everything has to be done under the name of the trust. So I won't go into the details of all the different types of trusts, because you didn't even ask about trust, but those are just different entities. And then the last question you asked was about research and policy. Absolutely. If you work in conjunction with mental health researchers, you can definitely be very valuable, because one of the things that's really missing is the interoperability of the laws inside of mental health. So we'll need a legal expert like yourself to help even us mental health practitioners understand how the different laws are supposed to be used and which one is upheld over the other. And right now, there's very little understanding inside of the profession and even in the general public on laws for mental health. So aside from that, you can always enter research. Research and academia is such that once you are a scholar, you can study in any field and give yourself the permission, to call yourself an expert if you can give us evidence on this and that. So feel free to do a lot of research, policy, advocacy work. I've done a lot of policy work. I was one of the team members in the first ever National Mental Health Conference in 2019, November, which actually created the Presidential Task Force. And at the time, the former President, Uhuru Kenyatta, appointed a task force to revamp mental health focus, because at the time, especially with COVID, there were so many mental health conditions that people became aware of. I think it's the lockdown, but I also think there was just mental health became a buzzword. Everybody was really, really keen to see what the government will do. And so it was out of that conference that we came up with a 10-point communique and created policy. Now we have something we call a mental health action plan that was not there before. So it's good to check out those documents online and to be able to see, what to do. I see a comment here from Daki Duba. I think CBO is good. Kama unataka kucheza chini. The list I have here for clarification is quite long. I'll reach out to you, Dr. Wangari. No problem. You can always type in the chat the list of questions, or you can also raise your hand. We still have about 45 minutes, so don't worry about that. And you can always reach me later, obviously. It's not the end of the conversation. We are just starting. So we do have quite a lot of things that we need to learn from each other. All right. Anybody else?
Yes, madam. Thank you very much for the presentation, but I would really recommend or request if that last topic is a training on its own, because many times when we're going to NGO space or trying to do something, sometimes there's the saying, you don't have to wait for things to be done. You can do the little that you can by yourself. But you find when you go into that space, there's a lot of legalities and terminologies and things that come up. From personal experiences, I think even my colleagues on the same organization with me will agree. You find that funding an NGO it's very, in the start, you have to put in a lot of your own resources. And at the end of the day, you have no business aspect to it that you're allowed to do. So it becomes very tricky until you're somewhere where you have a cloud that you can attract maybe funding from abroad or foreign funding. It becomes very difficult to sustain. So I feel like that last topic you're discussing, answering the lady's question, the lawyer's question, I feel like that's a training on its own. If you could one day offer us that training, would be very appreciative, because you make inquiries here and there, but everyone tells you different things. So depending on what position they have and the information they have access to, that's the information they can give you. So it becomes very complicated, especially if you're like us who don't have a legal background.
Thank you so much for that comment. Actually, since you're speaking, tell us, what is sunset and sunrise determinism? Then I'll go back to your to your comment. I didn't understand that.
Actually, I'm not the same person who. My name is Raza
So,
Ahmed. Sorry for that.
okay, sorry
I
about
just
that.
went straight into the point. My name
No
is Raza
problem.
Ahmed. I'm an
Yeah,
architect
I
by
wasn't seeing your
profession,
name. Mhm.
and I'm actually joining from Zambia, Lusaka.
Okay.
I am very engaged in mental health in Kenya. I visit Kenya every 3 to 4 months on the
Mm.
same. And we are youth who are trying to do something in the mental health space because of,
Yeah.
like most people who are in mental health and have passion about it, probably a family member or someone you know,
Yeah.
we've grown up seeing them go through some challenges,
All
or
right.
even ourselves as individuals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is how I came to be part of this.
Okay.
Yes, I am
Yeah.
not the one who asked that question.
Okay,
I think I
thank
asked a
you. I'm
different
sure you
question.
all know each other, but I'm the one who doesn't know you. Sorry about that. But let me respond directly to your inquiry and your comment. It's quite on point. It's quite accurate, actually. So when we talk about the best entity, remember, we shouldn't confuse an entity as a vehicle with the actual work. Sometimes people ask, what does it take? What does it take to make a difference? Must you have a vehicle? Must you have an entity? And the answer is yes and no. Sometimes, yes, you'll need a vehicle because a bank or a funding agency will not give you money in your hands. You have to have a registered entity with a bank account and show that you have audited accounts over the years, like you're proving to this funding source that you're actually responsible to do that. But most of the things we need to do we really need to have an entity? And there was one of my mentors who asked me, do we need brick and mortar all the time for you to actually create something in its embodiment? Do you have to have a physical structure for you to say, for example, that you will do something? Sometimes it's more your disposition. Sometimes it's more leveraging and seeing who's already doing something. For example, a lot of the work being done in mental health is actually in religious spaces. So before you go rushing to start your own little NGO and something that's not even very visible, why not partner with people who are already doing the work informally? And a lot of, as I was saying earlier, a lot of clergy are very happy to actually just, they would love for a lot of mental health input in the kind of work they do, because they also realize they may have a lot of what the religious scriptures will say, but they don't have a lot of how somebody can break it down into behavioral steps across time and follow up. For example, if you want to quit a habit like smoking, there's very, very specific steps that people can actually use, while they know from religious spaces that smoking is harmful to your health, but the clergy may not have all the knowledge and all the expertise in how to actually make someone implement that behavior change. So that's where we come in. So thank you so much for that. And I agree, it's complex, it's not easy. And if you want to start an NGO, you have to have some clout somehow. And so I think my broader answer to that is leverage, keep networking. Even if you start your own, it is not just about the entity. It's about the leadership and the life you bring into it. And yes, it is passion. It might be thankless effort. A lot of NGOs only see the light of day after the person is dead. And now they, that now the people see, oh, this person was really talking about something that needs to be changed, unfortunately. But we know that there are still NGOs which have been very successful. I would say, in summary, two things that would help for a bright success in the field or in the career. One is doing the work. So clocking hours, getting experience. Number two is mentorship. You do need a business strategist. I think we have to follow the 75-25 rule. So we can't just be thinking all the time. Thinking is 75%, but we have to do something, and we have to follow, some sort of mentorship and strategy so that the chances of success are a bit higher, than the chances of failure. So I would say doing the work and getting mentored is equally important. In our field, we talk a lot about at whose feet did you sit? So who would you consider to be your mentor or your coach or your strategist? And nowadays you can hire, these are also fields that are professional. People are hiring people to just help them break through where they are feeling stuck inside of like scaling up and growing their work. But I like what you're doing in Lusaka, and keep connecting to those people in Kenya and also other countries. I think that's a really good strategy. If you have more people buying into the vision, then the work continues, whether or not there's any entity. Thank you. Oginga Emma says, thank you so much, Daktari. I'd like to reach out for further discourse, especially on policy development. Yes, I do a lot of work in policy development. My latest foray is actually in M&E, so a lot of program effectiveness, design, and also checking out the evaluation and monitoring of programs. I'm now being called to do a lot of program evaluation work by function of having helped so many startups and entities and individuals to grow. So now policy development is a natural progression in my career. However, that's also a field on its own. And I'm happy to also work with policy development experts as well as yourself if you'd like us to do that. There is still a lot of laws that are very punitive in Kenya. For example, the suicide one that still considers it a crime. So there's been a lot of lobbying now to remove that and have people who are suicidal or people who want to die by suicide to be treated. Those people don't need to be taken into police stations and incarcerated. Thank you for that. Let me see if there's any other hand. Anybody else who wants to ask anything? Yes, Daki Duba, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think I've been a keyboard warrior since the session started.
Okay.
I really appreciate all the contents that you're sharing with us. And I kept taking note. And since what I wanted to ask for a bit long, I just wanted to clarify the issue of sunset sunrise. I was the one who was putting that on the chat. So it's the same as glass half full, half empty technique. Yeah. Mostly it's used for therapy sessions to determine the issue of like some mental conditions generally. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I was wondering what that is, but I get that. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? All right, if there are no further questions, let's keep in touch. And thank you so much for your kind attention. Over back to you, Mariam. I'm not sure if Mariam is on this call. If she is, she's unmute. Meanwhile, somebody had asked how to invest in mental health research and advocacy in sub-Saharan Africa. But I think we covered that, where there is existing insufficiency in data, stigma, and cultural barriers. I thought that was a very interesting expectation there, or question. Yeah, how do we actually invest in mental health research and advocacy? I think we need to bring out the need to those people who actually have the funding so that we can get a lot more data. We map out where, the biggest issues are. And then stigma and cultural barriers. I don't see that our cultures are antagonistic to mental health. All I see is that there's not enough partnership or understanding in the ways that we understand mental health. Recently, I was working with a lady who said that her husband is beating her and she doesn't think that qualifies anything for mental health, So it's very interesting how people understand different things going on and what they attribute to it. And he said, oh, he just beats me because he's drinking alcohol, and that's nothing to do with mental health. And I was baffled because this person actually doesn't think, he just thinks the husband should just stop drinking and stop beating her. So she doesn't see any of those things as related any closely to mental health. And then I told her, so what are you going to do about it? And the lady says, I'm going to go and also drink alcohol. So do you see that? So she says, I'm going to go drink alcohol so that I can also forget these problems. And so trying to convince such a person that that's a mental health, she qualifies squarely for mental health, and also her husband, is very difficult. So what I do is I work with people where they are at in their understanding of the causes, the attributions, and the ways of resolving things. And so at least I was able to convince her about the physical side of the harmful effects of alcohol. And from there, she was able to stop. And then the beating and the alcohol from the husband's side did not stop. So the idea is again to integrate at the community level with what people are understanding, rather than seeing culture as a bad thing, because in any case, culture is what gives a lot of us our own worldviews. Yeah, so I'll take a comment. I see Emma Oginga and then Daki Duba. Welcome.
Hello, Daktari. So I've received requests from my fellows who are very impressed by your presentations, and they are working in different fields with different projects, and they would like to collaborate with you in the future, if that's okay with you. So I'm kindly requesting you to allow us to reach out with regard to collaborations.
Yeah, sure. So I had already shared my contacts. Maybe I'm going to just type them again in the chat for those who came in later. I'm happy to do that. I'm currently looking for collaboration, so I'll be very happy to work with you. I just want you to specifically tell me how you'd like us to partner. Then I'll be able to consider that with my team, and I'll be happy to do that. Thank you. All right, Daki, do that.
Okay, thank you once again. I'm a bit confused, and this is something that I tried many times, but I think it's just a strategy that I lacked previously. How do you think, and how the rest of the learners think we can help those grassroots communities, especially when they don't have rehab centers? Imagine the issue of mental health issues are at alarming state, and then the county is just there. Communities, they have no specific point to take their clients when they need mental health services. There is no rehab centers like generally. So in those cases, and I think in line with policies also generally across Kenya, what do you think we can do for these communities?
That's a really important point. Remember, most of the time in actual suffering of people, there is a lack of connection between I am suffering and there's a service over there. So that's where you can really come in. Doing first aid work, doing championing, and using the human rights-based approach to actually heighten people's awareness and understanding. What would make a farmer, for example, in a rural community in Kenya, leave their farm and go and talk to somebody because they're struggling with something? You see, most farmers will count that it's now planting season. I don't even have time to waste going to speak to somebody, but I still have a problem. That's a mental health problem. So then your work will be to have that person see how it will actually benefit their work in the farming. All right. And it is true that sometimes government agencies may be seen as lethargic. However, government is one entity that I say can work very slowly and at other times can work very fast. When it's seen to be the lethargic, it is probably because there is no nearest available facility, just as you've said. There are some hard to reach places. But where actually government is efficiently working, you will find that with devolution, every last county, every last sub-county has some presence of mental health. So even just starting a database, listing referral centers. During COVID, we did a lot of linkage work. There were lots of people who, after lockdown, started to reflect about their lives, and they were now beginning to really struggle inside their households. And so doing that was very important in order that people know they have an option, they have a place they can go. And so those are really important points around leveraging access and having people see the importance. So, and we find that even those who come for counseling, even in government facilities, they may only be able to afford to travel once only. And so we use therapies like solution-focused brief approach, whereby one meeting might be a complete intervention. And so we try to equip the person with all what they may need in that short time when we are meeting them, so that if ever they don't have a chance to come again, or if only they'll come after a long time, then at least they have adequate skills and strategies. And so that's where the place of training is, keeping on increasing competency of those who are reaching people, so that the message is loud and clear. It's the same. We are saying there is help. We just have to locate where it is, and we just have to rally the right people and approach the right people who can make it sustainable. You know, for instance, in substance use, we find that a lot of families will disown the person who is drinking too much or taking drugs. And so access to care becomes a nightmare because nobody is willing to pay for these things. So that's where the government can really come in and subsidize the cost and have even fully sponsored programs for people to get help. Thank you so much for that point. I see another question. Kilena Mapenai. Wait, before you start, Kilena, there is a question here from Brian Kipruto. So what about certified online courses and certifications from mental health fellowships? Does that mean the threshold of approaching NGOs and government agencies, as well as CBOs, to collaborate with them on matters mental health? Okay, so that's a really good question. So the certified courses, do they meet the threshold of approaching NGOs, government, and CBOs for collaboration? The answer is they may not meet the threshold in every case, but they're a good starting point, because collaboration is about, or partnership is about, strength building. So we even have another word called collaboration. You build together in order to compete for bigger, you compete for a bigger market share because the needs are so huge. So how about if you did a lot of equipping mental health practitioners, and this is what you have to offer. So you're giving them all of these spaces. The point of a training is for what? For reflection and improvement in your practice. So if you're giving this as your offering, then you can easily use that to prove evidence, get evidence for all the impacts that you have. And with that, you have a good case. And maybe an NGO, a government agency, or a CBO might be able to see that as a way of scaling up their providers or the number of practitioners who can be available at any one time to give help. So it is one way. It does not always meet the threshold for collaboration because that depends on the vision. It's always good to connect with people with the same values so that you actually collaborate. So training is just one aspect. It may not change or transform the entire system holistically, but it is a good place to start. From there, what we need after training is deployment, referrals, linkages, and actual work getting done on the ground. So thank you so much for that question. So let's go back to the person who had raised their hand. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
So I've been listening. This is an amazing session. So I have a question around inclusivity when it comes now to services rendered or offered to somebody who wants to maybe seek help when it comes to depression, suicide, maybe they're suicidal and all that. So I want to understand one thing, like the minority group, people like the LGBTQ community, they exist in Kenya, but there's homophobia, there's transphobia. So where can they run to when it comes to places that they want to seek help? Another thing also, part of the minority group, we have the sex workers. I have not seen or even had a place whereby we talk about the careers that are looking into the minority groups when it comes to them seeking, being given the services and all that, or the traumatized kids. Okay, we have the GVRCs in counties right now, but how, nitasemaje, ni wangapi wako trained enough kukua kwa hizo particular spaces, and how many do we have in those spaces where these kids wenye wamekuwa wamedhulumiwa, the sexual gender based violence and all that, wakiwa hapo, how can we actually lobby for more safe spaces when it comes to inclusive or the minority groups?
Thank you so much. So unfortunately, that becomes more the burden in the private sector. So you'll see a lot of civil society coming in there. There are organizations doing amazing work. I have worked closely with the SOGI community, and you find that you will actually have people who exclusively have funding and are running programs for that community. So although you may find the societal stigma is still very, very large, these are human beings and they should never be denied any service, especially if they entered into any government facility. They should just be treated as citizens of the country. So what you find in reality is that a lot of civil society groups, I don't know which county you're asking from, but this is available online. I do know names of organizations I've worked closely with, and feel free to reach out. So we also do have lobby groups for having their rights included, including at the workplace and in other places. This is still more an advocacy wing, while it should be more mainstream. So unfortunately, the way the status quo works, it makes those people who are marginalized only belong to the advocacy lobby groups, while they should actually be mainstreamed, which is some sort of institutional betrayal, but that's the position. About how many trained providers we have for specialized groups, we haven't mapped that. That's a really good question. That is an aspect of research we really don't know. And we can estimate numbers of mostly only the formal providers. We don't even know who's doing informal work. I think when the board comes up and finishes to serialize us, register us, and give us registration numbers, I think we'll be able to now say how many trained providers we have doing different specialized work. Like you asked about traumatized kids. And although the GVRC Center is there and there's a lot of government agencies working with children, still not enough. The quality standards are not well monitored, and we still find cases of re-traumatization of the kids who are already traumatized. So still a lot of work to be done on quality effectiveness and checking who is actually doing the work. Recently, you saw the Ministry of Education sending out a warning that nobody can enter any Kenyan school without prior permission. And we still have a lot of people infiltrating our schools, and the kids are getting random mix of mentorship and things. And the government has now begun to see that some of that intervention is actually harmful. So we need to know who's going there and what is their curriculum based on, and are you just trying to get, something done that's not aligned to our national values, for example? So those are some of the very major questions that we are still grappling with, unfortunately, in this country. So a lot of you are futuristic thinkers. You are thinking of the ideal situation, and some of your questions are actually comments on what needs to happen. So thank you so much. All right, anybody else? Okay, I think we have exhausted the topic, and thank you so much for your kind audience and attention. Have a nice day.
You too.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi,
Lorraine.
Daktari.
Hi, here you are.
Oh, yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for the great session. I've been here for a few minutes, and I've had the amazing bit of the session. So thank you so much for that good work. I'm joining in place of Mariam. She's a bit busy. Yeah, but she'll join in later. So we still have 20 minutes left because the next speaker will join in at 11. I hope you can hear me, guys.
We can hear you.
Hello. Okay, okay. So was just confirming if I'm still audible. Okay, so the next speaker is joining in at 11. So if we if you don't have any question, we can use this time to maybe rush to the washroom, take a cup of tea, have a break, and then join in at 10:55 to welcome our next speaker. I hope that is okay for all of us. Hello. Okay. So we meet here at 10:55 again. Thank you, Dr. Hello. Are we back? Hello. Are we back? It's 1 minute to 11.
Yes, we are back.
Okay, nice. Okay, so our speaker is here. So let me just introduce her as we wait for the rest since time is not on our side. So our next speaker is Sakina. I'm afraid to say the next name, I might pronounce it wrongly. So sorry for that, Sakina. So Sakina is a clinical psychologist, Kenya Associate of Professional Counselors. And So the time is yours. Sakina, you can take over. As the rest, I will join in. Thank you.
No worries at all. Thank you so much, Loreen. My name is Sakina Kalyan. Don't worry about the name. I've had all different names being told to me. I will keep my video on so you can see who's talking to you. And then maybe in the presentation in the middle, do network, I will switch it off. Yeah, welcome to today's talk. And today we're going to speak about psychosis. I am just going to present in a few seconds. A little bit about me is I am a clinical psychologist. I have studied a bachelor's of social science with a double major, one in psychology, the second one in social development from the University of Cape Town, South Africa. And then I moved back to Nairobi home. I worked at Chiroma Hospital, I worked at other hospitals, and I worked at a clinic. And now I'm also in the process of completing my master's in clinical psychology, which hopefully should not take that long, hopefully. I'm in the process of just finishing my thesis, and then yeah, that is all about me. So today's presentation, I would like to make it as interactive as possible. So please feel free to raise your hand up or unmute yourself, ask a question, add in anything you feel is important. But we're here to talk about psychosis, which is a topic that we kind of very much misinterpret. And so this is the ride of psychosis. So yeah, so for today's presentation, we will sort of focus on the types of psychosis, what exactly psychosis is, the signs of psychosis, what causes psychosis, and towards the end, we'll go towards treatment of psychosis. So yeah, let's go on. So psychosis is actually not a mental health disorder on its own. It's actually a symptom of various mental health disorders. That's what I hear many people do miscommunication or misinterpretation about, where they call someone, oh, you're suffering from psychosis. Not really, or you're suffering from a psychotic breakdown or something like that. It's not a disorder in its own or an illness in its own. It's actually a symptom. And psychosis is mainly characterized by loss of touch with reality, which means what people are seeing around them, they are actually unable to differentiate between what is real and what is not real. So what could be imaginative. And that's why we say that sometimes psychosis can influence a person's thoughts, a person's perceptions, a person's emotions and behavior. I will go ahead and give examples where I feel it's necessary. And all to maintain confidentiality of situations or cases I've dealt with, I will keep names quite anonymous. So I had a case of a person who was who sort of had this fear that someone was following them, and they could never get into the public transport vehicles, mainly because there was this fear that this person is following them and this person is going to be there with them. And this changed how they thought about leaving their house, which means it changed or it altered their perception of the environment and the outside public outside of her house. Every time she was to be outside of her house, she was actually more anxious, she was irritated, she was scared, she was afraid. So her emotions were also being bubbled up by this specific thought. And her behavior as a result of all these were that she would never leave her house. She would sort of isolate herself, which brought about different signs of different disorders, either anxiety or depression. If I'm going fast, just stop me. Don't worry, absolutely okay if you have to sort of ask a question or anything. So what are some of the symptoms of psychosis? So psychosis has very similar symptoms to that we hear in schizophrenia or we hear in schizoaffective disorder, but we will just focus on psychosis. Remember, I said it is a characterization of symptoms. It's not a disorder. So the first symptom of psychosis itself is hallucination. This is what an individual will experience based on their sensory input, which is not real. So they could have auditory hallucinations, so such as they're sitting and they're hearing voices. I've had to deal with a case where someone was had come to the clinic and they were saying that they were hearing someone to tell them to kill themselves. And when kind of probe and understand what is that voice, there's no sort of reality to that voice. So it's out of reality. So it was actually an auditory hallucination. The other one is visual hallucination. So a common one that I hear with teenagers who sort of do experience psychotic symptoms are at night they see shadows or they see someone in their room. That exactly is a visual hallucination. Again, after probing that it is not true. And then there's tactile hallucinations. So this is on your skin, where some people may say that they're feeling warmth inside their skin, but literally there is no medical condition linked to that. And then these olfactory hallucinations, that's to do with the smell. Sorry, with the smell as well. And then we have gustatory hallucinations. There are various hallucinations and they're grouped. And then we have delusions, which is the second symptom. So delusions are beliefs that a person holds, which is actually not grounded within reality. What this means is that it is out of what is real. A delusion can be paranoia. So the example I started with, where this person literally had this fear that someone was following them and was going to hurt them. So that is a paranoia. It's out of reality. When I sort of conduct family history or ask family members or friends, no one is really chasing them. No one is really coming out to hurt them. So it's a belief that this person is held, which is out of it being a reality. Another one is grandiosity. So grandiosity is sort of when you believe that you have sort of abilities which are very exceptional, which are very amazing. Now, understand there's a difference between grandiosity and self-confidence, right? Grandiosity is when your belief is distorting your reality and it's out of what is reality. But self-confidence is you actually motivating yourself to do a specific task that you believe you need to work on. So you need to change from being a weakness to a strength. And then another type of delusion that is not here is religiosity. So this delusion is where an individual may say that they can speak to God, or they can speak to prophets or disciples of God. It's mainly dealt with spirituality and religiosity. All right, then we have something called disorganized thinking or speech. So this is where an individual is having difficulty in kind of arranging their thoughts and expressing them coherently. For example, a person may say, today I had eggs for breakfast, and then I went to the supermarket, but I didn't finish my breakfast. So it's kind of it's making sense, but really doesn't make sense because it isn't arranged in the way it's supposed to be. And this means that the speech becomes more disorganized, so you're unable to really understand what they're saying. And then we have abnormal motor behavior, which can be linked with catatonia, or this is where a person is purposely doing specific movements or is purposely restricting specific movements. For instance, we had a patient at the hospital once, a couple of years ago, who had a psychotic disorder, not psychosis, but a psychotic disorder with psychotic features and catatonia. So he would, every time we would call him in for a therapy session, either group therapy, art therapy, or even individual therapy, or even to go see the doctor, he would just be stuck. Like his hands, whatever they were doing would just be stuck there. So it's kind of a purposeful movement or a state where the person's movement is reduced. And then we have negative symptoms. So now this is where a lot of the signs of depression or anxiety can come in within here. So we have reduced social interactions, or they're withdrawing themselves from people. They're not going out of the house. For example, with my case that I started with, she literally refused to get out of the house. Diminished emotional expressions, or what we call as emotional dysregulation. For example, this is instead of showing sadness in a situation where you should show sadness, this person's actually laughing, or the opposite. Lack of motivation, anhedonia. So this is, if this person used to enjoy going swimming, they would actually have stopped going swimming. Or if they enjoyed going to play a sport, or to meet friends, they actually stop doing these tasks. Okay, so we have different types of psychosis. Again, remember, psychosis is actually a cluster of symptoms. It's not a disorder on its own. So we need to link it with specific disorders. So we have severe depression with psychotic symptoms. So severe depression literally means where you have more of the signs of depression, and then psychotic features come in the middle. Again, I'm not sure if you've done the workshop of depression, but for you to get a depression diagnosis, you need to meet the threshold, or the characteristics of the symptoms need to be met. It needs to be present for roughly more than 2 weeks, 5 days to 2 weeks. Depends on which type of depression is it. Is it with a bipolar, or is it just a major depressive disorder on its own? So those have to be met. And then the signs that we explored in the previous section, so any of these three or these two, hallucinations or delusions, have to also be present. And then we have substance-induced psychosis. This one within the Kenyan context is extremely high, extremely high. Every psychotic case, okay, every might be exaggerating, but majority of the psychotic cases I have addressed, or I have worked with, have actually had a substance use problem within it. So there is substances, excessive alcohol intake, excessive weed, excessive cocaine intake, and all those, or sometimes what we call even polysubstance uses, where they use so many substances you can't really pinpoint and say this is actually the diagnosis. All those can actually bring about psychotic features or psychotic symptoms. This is because substances go ahead and alter the brain mechanism, which alters what the person is perceiving or what the person is making out of their environment, which is always, or most often the case, different from what is real. So for examples, I had a client who had extreme substance use, which was weed use, so cannabis use disorder. And when I worked with the doctor had diagnosed this person with bipolar disorder. But when I started exploring with this individual, I understood that this person actually is using substances and is actually abusing or using excessive of this weed and alcohol. So when we explored more, he would tell me that every time he was under the influence of weed, he would actually see angels floating around. And it became such a dangerous situation because he would go up to his terrace after he has smoked weed at night. And you can imagine what the effect could be if he's telling me I'm seeing angels floating around while he is literally at the terrace alone and had potential danger to his life. So that's just an example. Another one, we have postpartum psychosis. So postpartum usually refers to what is common after childbirth, during the postpartum of this mother. A lot of the times we hear postpartum depression, which is very common, but we also have postpartum psychosis, which is linked with the psychotic features. An example is not that something I've dealt with, but I've read on this, is where this lady had given birth, and actually she had started having auditory hallucinations after birth, and that auditory hallucinations were often affecting her self-esteem because those voices were constantly saying she's a bad mother, and then those voices were telling her that she needs to hurt the child in whichever way that could be. So you can imagine sometimes having another diagnosis with psychotic features can be so dangerous at times. And then we have schizoaffective disorder. So schizoaffective disorder is usually psychotic disorder or schizophrenia with actually a mood disorder. So you can have schizoaffective disorder, the depressive type, if you only have depression symptoms. And then you can have schizoaffective disorder, the bipolar type, if you only have bipolar symptoms. And many times with schizoaffective disorder, we have psychotic symptoms. So you can view this as actually a disorder on its own, but it has symptoms of psychosis as well as a mood disorder. And then this is where we have brief psychotic disorder. It is not due to the excessive use of alcohol or drugs. Sorry about that. I will change it and send a proper document on this one. But this is actually when the psychotic symptoms are present for a specific duration. Now, this is where we say someone's having a psychotic break, or like, you know, the layman terms that we use. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions before I go to the causes? Any statements? Anything you want to add on? Okay. If not, let me just continue. Remember to always, if you have something to share, just sorry. If you have something to share, just unmute yourself and ask the question. Don't worry. So we have different causes.
Excuse me.
Yes, go ahead.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
What's the main difference between hallucination and delusion?
Hello, I think you're
Your mic is off.
Oh my God, I'm sorry. Okay, so I was saying hallucinations are always to do with our senses, which means we have 5 senses. So we have sound. This is where a person can actually hear voices which are out of reality. For instance, these voices never exist, or these voices, if people are around you, they actually can't hear those voices. The next one is taste. You can taste things. I've had people who say, I can always taste metal in my mouth. Again, it has to be proven that it's out of reality. So sometimes iron deficiencies bring a metallic taste. So I would send you to a doctor to try and ensure this is actually hallucination. Hallucinations are actually to do with your senses. Delusions are actually beliefs or beliefs that a person holds. A person can say that I am the highest and the greatest. Or, for instance, in the hospital, we had someone who would say, I am the president's grandson, or I am the president's son. Well, as you very much know, that is not real because you have done your history taking. So it's not real, but it's a belief they have. I don't know if I've managed to answer that question properly.
Yeah, you did. And what about situations where somebody hears a sound, they associate it with something else? Maybe there's a loud bang somewhere, but then somebody is like, yeah, that loud bang, it was a sign maybe from some spiritual realm. Like, yes, the sound happened, but their interpretation of it is different.
Yeah, and that would be a delusion then, because it's their interpretation of that sound which is linking towards a delusion. It's their belief about that sound. While in reality, that bang is not really a sign that someone is coming to hit, like to attack them, but it's their belief. So that would be a delusion. And if that sound really did not exist, then it would be also a hallucination. But if people around them say, yes, they heard the sound, then it's not a hallucination, but just a delusion.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, right. So it's important to realize that there are multiple causes of psychosis. But many times the reason that the underlying cause can be is because of a mental health condition. Sorry, I'm not sure why there's a line, but we should just go on. So if we go to the first sort of cause of psychosis, that will be genetic factors. Just like most of the disorders we have within the mental health field, many of them actually have a genetic predisposition or a genetic history. So what I mean by this is if a family member has any history of any psychotic disorders or even a mental health disorder, not really even a psychotic disorder, it can even be depression, then there is a high chance for this person to actually develop psychosis. Many studies actually say that they study twins, like identical twins and fraternal twins, to see the difference. And that's how they actually understand the genetic predisposition for psychosis. The next one is an imbalance of neurotransmitters in our brain. I always tell people our brain and our spinal cord are actually the most important parts of our body. So most of the chemicals that are being passed are passed from our brain. And what actually the chemicals do is they have an effect on our brain parts, which are required for specific tasks, so such as making a decision, motor movements, emotions, all that is actually guided by the brain. And our brain has two things. It passes neurotransmitters, which are chemical messages, or it passes hormones such as dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. All those are actually hormones. So most of the movements we make or the decisions we make are linked with the messages that are being passed and the dopamine, the hormones that are being also secreted by our brain. So one of the biggest hormones that does affect our emotions, our mood, is dopamine. Many people are trying to induce a dopamine high, which means they're trying to induce the dopamine, which is a pleasure hormone, increasing it with actually illicit substances. So when there's excessive dopamine, at times it can bring about psychotic symptoms or psychotic features. And when there's low dopamine, it can bring about some of the symptoms of depression. And then we have also the structural and functional abnormalities of the brain. So the brain parts, we have our prefrontal cortex, we have a frontal cortex. All those are actually, they have a function in our body. So most of them sometimes are with our decision making, our thinking, our perception, our emotions. The brain part called the amygdala is actually very important for your emotion. It's what actually regulates an emotion. It secretes an emotion for you. All that is linked with how much dopamine is being secreted. When I mean by secreted, being produced. So that's why even the brain and functions of the brain is very important. And then we have environmental factors. This is very, very, very big. Environmental factors don't just start by what you're experiencing now or the environment you are in now. Environmental factors actually start during birth and even when you were in your parents' or mother's womb. So such as there's a high sort of correlation between fetal alcohol syndrome. So this is, let's say, a mother who is pregnant has alcohol, can actually go ahead and influence the mental health of a child later on when that baby is older. And other things are infections, stress, complications during birth or pregnancy, substance use, like I said, fetal alcohol syndrome, can influence the risk of gaining or having psychotic symptoms later on in your life. The other one is substance abuse. We have spoken so much about it, but substances like cannabis, which is weed, amphetamines, hallucinogens, alcohol. So all sort of here is, stuff like cocaine as well, Molly, MDMA, what we see in the environment right now. We also see a lot of cut being used. So all that can actually go the susceptibility of. I would kind of use the example given by someone previously who asked the question, a specific situation that in trauma response, for instance, let's say in the military, or I will use a little bit of a friend of mine who was unfortunately within the Westgate situation. So something like that. And if she hears a loud bang and it affects her, then that is a trauma response because she's scared. But that trauma response at times can also induce psychosis, whereas the signs come where she says, for example, the example that a fellow person did share was where if a loud bang is given and this person believes that that loud bang is a sign that someone's going to come to hurt me or to attack me, then you have, as a therapist, you have to clearly distinguish, is this a trauma response or is it actually a psychotic symptom? And the way you do this is by taking a lot of history about the trauma incident. So many times when you have experienced a traumatic symptom or traumatic event, there is a high chance you can have a psychotic symptom linked with that. So the bang can actually be where you say, you've heard the bang the first time, and now constantly it's your belief that the bang is means that some, now you say that when in reality there is no bang. So that does show how psychotic symptoms come with a trauma response or a trauma situation. Growing up in dysfunctional families where abuse was normalized or where you witnessed abuse or even experienced abuse, neglect such as your needs were never being met, all those kind of influence or create a huge risk for developing psychotics. Okay, so we now go to, again, the brain. This is more on neurodevelopmental factors as a baby and as an adolescent. How your brain development happened as a child can influence your susceptibility, or the way they say, vulnerability of having psychosis or psychotic symptoms later on in your life. All that goes on to saying that there's specific brain regions for specific function. And unfortunately, if they are not developed to the level that they should be, it is going to influence how you think of things, how you perceive things, and how you relate to things. Certain psychotic symptoms, like we have epilepsy, we have Parkinson's, we have dementia. At times. We also have certain autoimmune diseases, severe epilepsy, and because of even the medication he was on to try and control the epilepsy, it was influencing his reality and bringing on delusional beliefs and also hallucination symptoms. So there are other factors which are very, very important. There is one big thing I tell most of my clients, which is two things need to be created in balance or need to be maintained in balance. The first is sleep, and the second one is diet. Whether you have depression, anxiety, psychosis, trauma, stress disorders, bipolar, or you have even schizophrenia, anything. The two main things that we need to create a balance on is sleep and diet. Regardless of what you eat for breakfast, you need to put something in your mouth as breakfast. Same as lunch, same as dinner. And that is creating a balance with your diet. Sleep. There is the minimum amount of time someone should sleep is roughly around 7 to 9 hours. Are you getting that much sleep, or what can we say is enough for you, and then we can slowly increase? That is trying to create a balance with sleep and diet. Sleep actually plays a role with your brain. And you also experienced this before. Maybe you've not slept well, and you have a test the next day, or you have a presentation at work, or there is something you kind of have to do which is very important. Your attention, your focus, or how you feel doing that is influenced because of limited sleep. Sleep plays on how you cope up with emotions, or how you feel specific emotion, or how you regulate specific emotion. Sleep goes ahead and influences how you think, what decisions you make. It also goes ahead and influences your energy, your motivation, your attention on specific things. That's why working on sleep, or trying to create a healthy sleep regimen or a healthy sleeping habit, will help you, or will try and protect someone from developing psychosis symptoms. Same as medication. We have so many situations where people misuse stimulant medications, or misuse steroids. Remember, all that goes and alters the brain and alters how much messages, neurotransmitters are being passed through, and what hormones are being secreted or produced. So all that is going to influence the likelihood of developing psychosis symptoms. Same with withdrawal from substances, which is very, very common. So a person who's maybe taken weed, and let's say they have smoked maybe 4 to 5 joints every day. Okay, that's quite a bit, but every day, let's see. So they were a heavy weed user. And then they come for therapy, they go for medication as well, and the doctor says, let's start reducing your use of weed. And through therapy, they slowly reduce the use of weed to now maybe 2 a day, then slowly 1 a day. As they are reducing, there is a high chance for them to actually develop psychotic symptoms. That's why a therapist will be very, very keen on how we do withdrawal from substances, because we do not want you to now believe that what you are experiencing, whether it's hallucinations, delusions, or disorganized speech, is actually a negative effect of not having the substance. Because that means the person is going to say that I was perfectly fine when I was on weed, so I should just go back to weed. And that's why we will educate you quite a bit on actually the signs of withdrawal, or what can happen as you are withdrawing from a substance. Any questions before I go on? Do forgive me, I have a cold.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes, Catherine.
All these symptoms of psychosis, they seem to be the same as those of schizophrenia.
Yes.
So are they kind of like the same thing, or?
Yes and no. So you have to realize, I started by saying psychosis is not a disorder. It's a characterization of symptoms, which often comes together with a specific mental health disorder. For instance, when we talk about schizophrenia, you can have schizophrenia without psychotic symptoms. That's what we call schizophrenia with negative symptoms. If I can go back to the symptoms, maybe that would be easier to explain. So these are psychotic symptoms, right? But you can also have schizophrenia with just the negative symptoms, and we call it schizophrenia with negative symptoms. Or you can have schizophrenia with also the presence of psychotic symptoms.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you.
So it's not a disorder on its own, it's a characterization of symptoms. You're welcome, no worries. Anyone else?
Okay.
Do you have another question? You can go ahead. Okay, so I think we'll push toward the treatment of psychosis. The treatment option, or the type of treatment, based on symptoms of the person, the needs of this person, and the preferences. As much as we say, yes, you do have a preference. For instance, if you're not ready for medication, I cannot force you to go to a psychiatrist to get medication. But rather, what I can do is empower you to always go in for, try and empower you. Then let's just see the psychiatrist. It's not a must for you to take the medication immediately. Let's hear what their opinion is. So yes, a treatment plan is very unique for each person. You may have the same disorder, You may have the same symptoms, but the treatment plan is very different for both. Okay, so the first type of treatment we have, which is not always the main type, like for instance, different therapists work differently, is medication, where giving antipsychotics can actually help the person to reduce the intensity of those psychotic symptoms. For instance, a lot of antipsychotics, like you hear the word quetiapine, really does help with hallucinations or even delusions. However, when it comes to delusions, a lot of therapy also needs to be done because we're changing your thought pattern. And then we have, in severe cases, we actually go ahead for hospitalization. This is when actually the individuals are harm to themselves or to people around them, or they cannot care for themselves. And so they need a structured environment such as the hospital where they can be monitored, where the medication can be stable, can be given in a specific time to stabilize them. And also it's the first basis of therapy. I always tell therapists who work at a hospital, what you do at a hospital with a client influences if they're going to continue seeing a therapist, whether it's you or someone else outside of the hospital. And it really does matter how you are able to provide that care and that support for that person in a hospital setting. Again, different therapists work differently. For instance, for myself, if I give you assessments on psychosis or psychotic symptoms or even depression or any other mental health illness, and I see you on the severe spectrum, I tell you, let's do 4 therapy sessions, and then we bring in the psychiatrist to prescribe medication if needed. Same with hospitalization, when medication's not working the way we wanted it to work, or when therapy is not really giving you the results we needed it to give, or you're generally a risk to yourself or to someone else, such as suicidal thoughts or past suicidal behaviors or self-harm, then we would actually advise on hospitalization. And then we have the part that's very important for me, which is psychotherapy. There's so many other therapy techniques. I've just listed down 3, so many others. But the biggest one that helps when it comes to psychotic symptoms is CBT or any sort of cognitive therapy. There are different skills in cognitive therapy. There's something what we call cognitive restructuring, where you go ahead and restructure a negative thought to actually prove that it's actually negative. Then we go on to, under cognitive therapy, there is something called dialect behavioral therapy, which copes up with emotion. And then there is something also called rational emotive behavioral therapy, all under the cognitive family. Rational emotive behavioral therapy links towards a behavior and an emotion and a thought around that behavior. So all those therapy techniques, especially under the cognitive field, are very important because they give you coping skills on how to challenge your thought pattern, especially your negative thought pattern. It allows you to actually see what is real and test what is real by saying, this is false. Every bang I hear does not necessarily mean that someone is attacking me. There could be a construction happening beside me, and that's where the sound came from. There could be someone who's dropped something, and that's where the sound has come from. So it kind of, cognitive therapies help you to kind of change your thought pattern or your thought perceptions. And then we have family therapy. When it comes to any disorder with psychotic symptoms, it can be very, very stressful for the family. Because imagine this person is saying they're hearing things, they're seeing things, they believe someone's coming to attack them. And this family, most of the time, will be like, no, you know what, can you stop saying that? No, it's not true. Why do you keep saying that? Or if it's a teenager or a child, actually reprimand this individual. But in reality, we need to, as mental health professionals, we need to show families how to actually communicate and care for this individual. How do you react when an individual is actually going through a psychotic phase or having a psychotic symptom? What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to shout at them? Are you supposed to give corporal punishment? And if that person is a child, what do you do? So this is where family therapy is very important. Also under family therapy, what we do is psychoeducate. This is where We inform the family of what is psychosis, what is schizophrenia, what is depression with psychotic features, what is substance-induced psychosis, right? So that they are understanding that what is happening around him is actually meeting a threshold of a diagnosis. Something also families need to realize is when you have a diagnosis, it's just a label that is given because you meet specific symptoms. If we work on the symptoms, there's a high chance the label goes away, the diagnosis goes away. So there's always a pros and cons when it comes to diagnosing people. A lot of people say it creates labels on people, but it actually allows you to also understand that you meet specific symptoms, and that's why you have this diagnosis. So if you work on controlling or coping with those symptoms, the intensity of those symptoms reduce, which means the diagnosis goes down. So that's what it's important to explain family. Again, with individual psychotherapy, talk therapy, we use a lot of psychodynamic therapy, exploring your childhood, exploring your upbringing, exploring your needs, which were met, which were neglected. Also exploring, your relationship with your family and people around you, and then supportive therapy. Supportive therapy can be literally a term for all sorts of techniques that we can provide you. So if we're doing boundary setting, if we're doing planning and scheduling, all that can fall under supportive therapy or even behavioral therapy. And then we have psychosocial interventions. So psychosocial interventions are actually very important, like a very important role that the environment and people within the environment can play. So we have something called social skills training. This is where you try and improve the person's interpersonal skills. How do they communicate with themselves, intrapersonal, and also how do they communicate with other people, right? How do they react to certain situations? Are they someone that is constantly going to, be disorganized because their thoughts are disorganized? So they're also going to be in a disorganized environment. Trying to clear up your environment, showing them the social skills of your environment. How do you interact with not just people, but also objects in the environment? A clear environment helps you also try and clear your thoughts out. Same as vocational rehabilitation, which within Kenya is a very, very, I don't want to say rare, there's some places that could have it, but within the West, this is something that a lot of people do. So it's, once you go into a rehabilitation center or a system or a place, they actually provide you support for employment, where they try and ensure, you have a letter that does show that you are stable enough, you have gone through your treatment, you can actually do cope with a job, you have skills to cope up with stress from a job. If it was a substance abuse psychosis, you have gone through the weaning and the withdrawal of a substance. It kind of allows you to, within the employment sector. Another example under this vocational rehabilitation is the occupational therapists come into play. For instance, a person who maybe has a medical condition that is inducing psychotic symptoms, going in for occupational therapy can actually train you. Both of them can give you social skills as well as vocational skills that can help you to function outside, or to actually help you continue on with daily tasks in daily life. And the other one is education and psychoeducation. So what I'm doing right now is kind of educating all of you in psychotic symptoms and what psychosis is. And also psychoeducation is what we tell someone on these are the signs. This is potentially the causes. We can't pick out which one it is. Could be childhood, could be environmental, could be genetics. And this is what the therapy or the treatment can. And then we have the fifth one, which is very, very important. It is all you or the individual. So having a healthy lifestyle. This means a healthy diet, healthy sleep, exercises. The best way to gain a healthy way to gain dopamine or dopamine high, like I explained earlier, is through exercising, going for a walk, being in nature, and going for a run, all that actually induces a healthier way of a dopamine high. And then we have substance abuse as well, avoiding substance abuse. And then we have stress reduction technique. This is where mindfulness comes. Many people do not understand what mindfulness is. Mindfulness allows you to live in the present. It removes you from fear or worrying about the future and removes you from the guilt, the shame, and the doubt of the past and actually brings you back into the present. There are various ways to do mindfulness and various relaxation techniques. Taking a nap, going out into the nature, going for a walk, trying to meet up with friends, all those can be relaxation at times. Reading a book, if you like to bake something for yourself, whatever you perceive as relaxing can actually be a relaxation exercise, especially breathing techniques that really do help. There are various breathing techniques available that potentially mental health professionals do share with their clients. Yep, so as a conclusion, psychosis is very complex, right? And it affects millions of people worldwide. So as we understand the types of psychosis, the symptoms, the causes, we can now also understand how do we prevent and how do we treat it. Remember, recovery with the appropriate treatment and with the appropriate support is very possible. We just need to actually, as mental health professionals, provide that support. Yep, that's me. I have my number there. I actually have my email and I also have our Instagram handle there. If anyone has any questions, now is your time. All right, I am assuming there are no questions. I obviously have to thank every single person over here who has joined us and who has stayed along with me for this presentation. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you so much for even sharing your questions. Not only has that helped you, but it could have helped someone else.
Hi, Sakina.
Hi.
This is Mariam speaking.
Yes, Mariam.
Yeah, so thank you so much. The session was very insightful. And I'm sure the fellows have learned a lot. And we really do appreciate your time here, taking your time here to come and share more lights on psychosis with us. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Nivishe Foundation for even having me.
I can see that people are putting their comments on the chat. Brian Kipruto is saying family support goes a long way. So there are instances where one is diagnosed with psychosis and the approach is locking them up in an empty room. So that is so true for days. Yeah. Thank you so much, Brian. Josh is saying, thank you so much for the session. It was very insightful. Yes, I agree 100%. Thank you so much, Josh. Okay, so thank you, Sakina. So for the fellows, I'd like for us to, I can see someone is asking a question, Daki Duba, could psychosis have influence on suicidal clients? Sakina.
Yes, It definitely does. Remember, under psychosis, your reality is being distorted. So you may have a thought where or a delusion that someone is telling you you need to kill yourself, and that can actually influence suicidal clients to actually take a step. So the intent and the plan and their accepting the risk can actually go ahead and bring about suicidal risk. And yet also because of the negative symptoms.
Sorry, Dr. Sakina, please, if you could kindly repeat that and someone mute, someone having a background. Lauren, please mute.
Sure, just waiting for Lauren to mute. Maria, maybe you can mute. All right. So I was saying, yes, it is very, very likely when psychosis is there that it can influence suicidal ideations. This is because when it comes to psychosis, you have delusions where you may have a belief that someone is telling you, or even someone is saying that you do not deserve to live, or you should kill yourself or hurt yourself. And this can influence a lot of the thoughts of suicidal actions, as well as the intent and the plan of suicide, and can influence how the person may view these kind of beliefs. Again, like Daki did say, because of negative symptoms, yes, it does also play a huge factor on negative symptoms. A person may withdraw themselves, or may want to be away from people, may feel guilty, may feel worthless of themselves, which can again influence a suicidal ideation or thoughts. Very true, Brian. We should not contain someone who is experiencing psychotic symptoms. That's not the solution. You're just isolating them more, which again brings about more of the negative symptoms as well.
Okay, so I can see Brian Kipruto asking a question. So when one is convicted of an offense that might have been triggered by unstable mental health condition, do they get therapy behind bars?
Very, very good question, Brian. So within Kenya, it depends. At times, we do have sometimes where some prisons are willing to have therapists come in, or what actually does happen is they do go to Mathare, because that is the national hospital, the Kenyan National Hospital, and that's where they do get the support. But in the West, what they actually have is every prison actually has a forensic psychologist as well as a counselor. Now, forensic psychologist deals with kind of seeing the behavior when they are giving a testimony, and a counselor actually gives them therapy when they are already sort of being said that they are unstable. The counselor does give them therapy.
Brian is saying thank you for the insightful session. Pleasure having you on board today.
Most welcome, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, so I think we have come to the end of the session today. I'd like to again appreciate Sakina for making time to come and talk to us about psychosis and sharing more insights on it. And then also for the fellows, thank you for making time for being here. We are supposed to sign our attendance, but what we'll do is our leaders are going to share the attendance list on the group, on your WhatsApp group later, in like I think 10-15 minutes from now, so you can sign there. And remember, we already have the names of the people who attended the session. So if you didn't attend this session, or rather if you see someone who didn't attend the session and they try to put the names there, just try and let them aware that we have the names already, so we can have an accurate list of the people who attended the session today. So I know we were supposed to do the 3 presentation of last week's sessions today, but because we wanted us to learn more about careers surrounding mental health and also more on psychosis, we'll have to do that next Saturday. So next week, the first 15 minutes will be for group presentations. And then now after 9:15, then we'll pick up now on the day's topic. So we can leave now. We can leave now as we wish. Thank you.
Kindly help me with the registration. Hi Miriam, can you hear me? Do you have the link, registration link? Kindly send me. Ama utuandie tu basi majina.